This month has been all about positioning and category creation. Well, my guest today helped create the massive category of customer success as the first head of marketing at Gainsight. And he even wrote the book, Category Creation. Today, he's the founder at Golden Hour, helping founders and CMOs find their brand humanity. Let's welcome Anthony Kennada.
Excited to be here.
This month we were thinking, okay, who's actually created a category lately that was a killer? And then Gainsight came up and we're like, will he join us on the show, please, and tell us about it? You took a product and then created a movement and a community and a category. What was it like to do that and dominate?
Yeah, I mean, when we were doing it, we had no idea that that's what we were doing. Only looking back, does the clarity kind of come into play. And so what happened was, and hopefully this is interesting to viewers or listeners who are like thinking through, they might find themselves in a similar position that Gainsight found themselves in. We were a very young company, probably about 3 or 4 customers, literally like almost pre-revenue. And we came in, myself and Nick Maida, the CEO, during the Series A. And so we started spending a lot of time, talking to like investors, some company advisors, customers for sure, but also weirdly like industry analysts, trying to get a sense of what market does this product play in. And when we talked to the analysts, they all tried to position us in an existing quadrant or wave or whatever that didn't feel right. It didn't feel natural to what we were doing, because the software was doing something quite differentiated. There wasn't this like direct competitor to what we were doing. And so if you're building a company and you're like, hey, we have a bunch of like indirect competitors that kind of, fit, but no like incumbent 5,000 pound gorilla or whatever the saying is in our market. So what we observed was there was this job that existed called the customer success manager. We didn't name it. We just found this like LinkedIn group basically of the most passionate, this like passionate group of like 35 people or something. Half of them worked at Salesforce. And so I think they get the credit for naming it. But we went to some of these like meetings and meetups that they had, and all those meetups were like very like low production, but this kind of feeling was really kind of clear of like, oh my gosh, I'm finally around other people that are going through what I'm going through. And so the bet that we made early, which kind of defined the category creation playbook and journey and everything, was what if we like hosted our own event that basically took kind of this like informal meetup and poured some venture dollars into it and kind of built a conference. And then what if it had nothing to do with our technology and all to do with this persona? Would that work? Would people come? And so we ended up getting about 300 people there in our first year. And that really validated this hypothesis that, okay, by leading with thought leadership, by serving this persona radically through content, events, community, that we felt the pull there. And over time, we learned we can also sell them software as they sort of get more political capital, get more budget. We help arm them with like, here's how to buy, here's how to talk to your CFO about this. And over time, that's what happened. The customer success went from those like 35 people, whatever the number is in the Bay Area, to at one point, one of the fastest growing jobs in the world. Gainsight did very well, grew. And so I think like the big lesson there is our ability to champion a persona, help position this like problem that wasn't ultimately kind of talked about in like a really material way, surrounding them with modern content, events, like everything we did kind of falls somewhere in that spectrum. That what you're effectively doing is building trust with this audience. And so when they're ready to buy, they're going to think of you first. And so it's very hard for our competitors over time to catch up to like, okay, how are we going to build like a conference when Gainsight has 6,000 people in Moscone? So I think that the domination kind of factor you mentioned there, I think kind of kicked in over time as we started to like really build a moat around the brand and around this community of customer success professionals.
And we're going to get into the moat in a little bit.
Great.
It seems like a pretty big swing to say, I'm going to start a category. What would you say to encourage a marketer or an early stage founder who's like, that's too big of a risk?
Yeah, it is. I mean, it was super naive of us. Like, if had we known, if like people were talking about category creation back then, And they'd listen to podcasts like this and they'd hear people like me saying it's really expensive and hard and like there's much easier ways to go to market. We probably would have been like, oh shoot, we're a predictive support platform or something, or whatever kind of Gartner wanted us to do. So it was naive of us for sure to do it. So if you're a founder today, there's a lot more, documented about this playbook. I think the best advice I'd give is, for some companies, there's no other way. And Gainsight found themselves kind of in that position that like we weren't competing in the support category against Zendesk that had more of a help desk kind of reactive type of support kind of motion. We weren't competing with Salesforce from a CRM perspective because there was no like new business acquisition kind of motion kind of developing there at all. So what would we do? We couldn't do anything but create a category or die as a company, honestly. And so I think there might be a lot of founders today, especially in this kind of, this kind of second industrial revolution we're living in today, that find themselves in a similar boat where maybe we're not just building like the agentic version of whatever, we're actually building something completely new. And for them, I'm like, sorry, you have to take the red pill or whatever and do it. And by the way, like it is really hard, but it's also like super fulfilling. And so I think there's something really emotionally kind of powerful about building a category. And then for anyone that doesn't find themselves in that like box, like don't do it. Like honestly, just say no. Just say, hey, let's go and take a challenger position against some other brand in the market because it's just not worth it. So that's kind of how I've sat with it now over the years.
The folks that have come on so far this month, we've got April Dunford, who's the positioning, obviously awesome. And then the guys from Play Bigger. So obviously Jason from there would like category design, but if you don't have buy-in and it doesn't make sense, don't do it. It is hard, but to unseat a king is pretty almost statistically impossible.
I think the challenge is we've romanticized category creation at the board level, at the investor level. And so you have a lot of these founders that are like, how can we create a category? Let's go figure it out. Let's like take this like very weird playbook and like squeeze it into this kind of, forced kind of motion. And so I think, and I'm partially to blame for helping to write the book for that, or one of the books on it. But yeah, I think you've talked to folks like, you should get Udi from Gong on the podcast as well, because he, I think, has a similar belief that I do, that like, hey, we did it. We're so glad we did. And it really worked out. We never want to do it again. It's kind of the feeling.
That was my next question. What would you do differently in 2026?
Well, what's funny is, again, I say that and I'll never do it again. Audience Plus, the last company I did, which we just had a small kind of asset sale of almost a year ago to the day, actually, like literally Sunday, I think.
Oh.
I found myself doing it again, in that we built this product that like the problem that I observed was that we're going to distribute this podcast across maybe YouTube, Spotify, the RSS networks. You might chop it up into some short form content, distribute on LinkedIn and other places. But ultimately, our audience lives in all these other places. It doesn't live in our kind of marketable database. And if LinkedIn changes their algorithm back then, if TikTok like went out of business or was banned or whatever, like you lose that relationship with your audience. It's a really big kind of existential kind of issue for a marketing team. If you get banned on LinkedIn as a founder building an AI right now, you're like done. Like, what do you do?
Yeah.
And so we saw that Substack and Patreon and some of these tools were really kind of championing this idea of building your own audience, but they were doing it through like the newsletter or community kind of angle. And so we built a platform that basically said, hey, your blog hasn't been touched since like 1990 from like a technology perspective. Your blog should feel more like Netflix, where you have like multimedia, where you can convert your audience into subscribers and give them exclusive content just for subscribers. And so we started building a platform for that. And to sort of like champion this broader idea, we use the language of owned media, which, is written in marketing textbooks all over the world for sure. Like we're not creating that from a category necessarily, but there wasn't an owned media platform software category, certainly not recognized across kind of analysts and all of that. But also when you're creating a category, you're championing an idea. And that's, I think, the marketing opportunity, but challenge as well, is like, how do I get CMOs, demand marketers, content marketers to think about this? And that's where we did our own conferences, our own podcasts, our own events. So I ran the playbook back years later, but it looked a lot different. Where, it wasn't just like performance content, it was editorial ones, just like this one. We filmed like a documentary. We had like creators that were building kind of shows on our network, and we were kind of distributing them, doing creator deals as a seed stage company. We built our own production studio. We hosted a conference that was like very different than we did Gainsight. Gainsight was like, how many people can we get to fill Moscone Center? This was like invitation only, high sort of experience with this like digital kind of college game day desk broadcast to create FOMO for people that weren't one of the 300 in the room. So events have changed since 2019, let's say. So I'd say the formats have changed in the years since Gainsight. The mediums have changed. Events are just so different now in terms of what people are willing to travel for after COVID and what drives people there, like the registration kind of build up and registration to attendee kind of conversion rates. All of it is like just wildly different. So it's been really fun to kind of do that, to kind of take another swing at it again.
Yeah. And you've had a front row seat, see marketing evolve like in the mix. How does AI shift the landscape now?
Yeah, it breaks everything. That's kind of the punchline. It's like,
He said with a smile.
well, you have to, I think. I think there's, in my conversations with other CMOs and marketing leaders, there's sort of two camps. And I think maybe you start in the first camp and then you find yourself in the second camp thereafter. The first camp is like, nothing's working. Everything I thought like I was supposed to do just isn't kind of, isn't doing it. So my experience, my playbooks, all of these things that I bring to the table just feel less relevant now. There's a 22-year-old like YC grad working 996 that's like out hustling me on everything. And I've got 2 kids and whatever. And so there's a group that's like, I think, really still processing and trying to figure out, where do we live in this new world? How do we add value in this new world? And then there's a bigger group, and I think increasingly folks graduating from box number 1 into box number 2 that are like, okay, everything's changed. This is exciting. Like, we've got to figure out how we evolve and how we contribute to this new playbook that's being written now. And so you go from like sad to, hey, this is actually quite, it's like the gold rush again for marketers. And so as far as I've kind of gotten, especially over the last year, really trying to study the market, I think there's a few things. I already hit on one of them, that experience is a little bit less of a premium compared to aptitude or being willing to be hands-on and practical. So the ivory tower CMO role is dead, basically, and we got to get hands on keyboard and start building things again. That first principles matter a lot more. So if you're interviewing, if you're in your board meeting, it's a lot. I think executives kind of generally want to see CMOs that are willing to riff with them, that are exchanging ideas, that are on the whiteboard, versus saying, well, here's how we did it at Gainsight, or here's how we did it at, name your company. And then the third thing is the actual tactics. And this is, I think, the hardest pill to swallow, is that I'm convinced just about 80% of marketing, if not more of it, is going to be automated away in the next 3 years. I don't know. Like, who knows how fast? Anything that's like transactional or performance based. So, we have to ask ourselves, do we need a paid media coordinator or whatever? Do we need like somebody to A/B test the website and own kind of optimization of like our digital? Like, I don't know. And hopefully there's a lot of really exciting jobs for them on the other side of this. But I think about 80% of that work will be managed by human experts, but they're managing a system of agents that are effectively doing that work better than we are at a PhD level, 24 hours a day. And what's left is the 20%. And it could be less, honestly. And I've tried to call that brand humanity, but the idea that like building authenticity as a brand, like having your founders be in the front of the market, creating messaging and positioning and storytelling that's a bit more emotional, not just kind of feature function, developing a sense of purpose within your team, creativity, building connection with your audience, creating that belonging with your community. These are things that like an AI can help you certainly do that work, and it'll help you do it better and scale it. But these are the like attributes of being human that draw people to making purchasing decisions or being a part of a company or joining a company as a customer. So my sense is that 20% brand humanity is going to be like the thing that marketers are focused on building, and then managing agents to kind of do the rest. And again, that's really exciting if you like it. And I think one of the proof points of this is OpenAI. Their brand should be like the Terminator brand, right? Like that's it. The world is ending. It's all automated. It's cold and callous. And their campaign at the was it end of last year was like so iconic. It was warm and nostalgic, and it felt like the Wonder Years. If anyone watched that show in the '90s, and very human. And I think Anthropic's doing something similar. So we're seeing even these leading brands and voices in the AI era leading with brand humanity. And I think that's going to be the role of the marketing team going forward.
Why does brand humanity matter so much for founders and CMOs to start paying attention to?
Mainly because let me think about it through this lens. There's some data out there that like I think it's called the 95-5 rule, that 95% of your audience is not in market today for your products and services. 5% is, and for that 5%, you should build your like conversion engine of your dreams, right? And it's really important to do so. Brand humanity is what builds relationship with the 95. It's what we talked about even with Gainsight. It's why, so that when you're effectively building trust with that broader, much, much bigger audience set, so that when they are ready to buy, they're going to think of you first and then get into that 5% funnel. And so people buy things emotionally. That's, I think, pretty well understood at this point. And so our ability to kind of have that emotional relationship with our audience is effectively how we go forward. So it's not just like arts and crafts marketing. It's literally like, how do we rise above the sea of sameness? How are we known? How can people even like, know we exist, care enough to like hear what we have to say? And if and when they're ready, be warmed up and nurtured enough that they're going to engage with us on a sales process. And there's just so many products out there now. Everything's getting funded. And so, how do you compete? How do you stand out? Brand humanity is the way you do it.
For startups that don't have a big budget, because you named two large companies there,
Yeah.
how can they compete and leverage AI to compete with brand humanity?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the good news is I think authenticity is sort of like the first kind of tenet, if you will, of brand humanity, meaning you don't need like Johnny Ive or whatever doing like a major brand campaign in downtown San Francisco. The cost, I forget how much it costs. It was like a Super Bowl commercial level of production for their kind of launch video or that video. You need Riverside for, I don't know, what is this, $20 a month, $50 a month, something like that. You need ear pods, a great mic, nice backdrop, whatever it is. And you need to show up as a founder and talk and to your market and talk about why this problem resonates. There's almost like, I think maybe a little David and Goliath thing going, because I think even for I think OpenAI's execution was incredible on the campaign, but the more we invest sometimes in production, it feels like a commercial. It feels a little bit like you're being sold to or whatever. And so the ability to, like, I think authenticity wins over production value any time. So I wouldn't think you have to like overinvest in marketing. I would figure out what's our story. Everyone's talking about storytelling is like the thing kind of at this point for marketers, for companies, for brand building. So what is our story? I need to, as a founder, accept some responsibility to not just build product, but also to be in front of the market and tell that story from my perspective and why I think it matters, and sort of everything else kind of, if it's a story that resonates with the market that you've tested that feels right, I think you'll do just fine. I think those are kind of the foundational pieces.
Yeah. And I'm a newer TikToker.
Mm.
I've seen some of the shittiest quality videos of just
Yeah.
a founder being like, one of the companies we work for, our founder did this and he's walking around a trucking parking lot and he's like, see, we got parking for the trucks here.
That's awesome.
People ate it up. They loved it. They're like, there he is with his shitty phone, because it was like 8 years ago doing these videos, and people like the realness.
Totally. And you can do the like LinkedIn hasn't caught up to, I think we're about a year behind the TikTok trends or whatever, but There's the like swipe thing that people are doing, like start a video. There's all these like little hacks that cost nothing, but just a little muscle memory to like figure out a way to stand out.
Oh man, one of the things you talked about a few times so far has been events and
Yeah.
conferences and these in person. And one shift I'm starting to get pumped about is all the kids wanting to go analog.
Yeah.
What do you make of the resurgence of this offline marketing?
I'm so happy about it. I feel, I don't know. On a personal level, I feel like I'm an event marketer trapped in like a marketer trapped in a founder's body, basically. So I love just putting on events. I think there's something that the human in-person experience, just you can't replace that digitally. I tried it at Hopin. I think there's something just very powerful that happens when we get together. I think there's like all of this just dopamine burnout that we have around like our Slack notifications, our email inbox, our LinkedIn feeds and TikTok and YouTube shorts and all of that. And add on top of it, like AI created slop content. And you're like, I don't even know what's real anymore. And so there's this trend happening. You're right. It's the young kids that are leading it, I think. There's like this Gen Z trend around flip phones right now that I didn't know about until recently, where there's almost this like hunger and thirst for analog to get away from this kind of digital just distraction that we live in, these devices that we're like tethered to sometimes like literally. And it's like, how do we just be human again? So yeah, I think it's, again, I'm very excited about it. I think it's good for humanity that we do it. And I think if you're an event marketer, if you're someone that's designing experiences, it's a really exciting time to be in that role. The other piece I'll say is like there's this like wellness trend that I'm starting to pay attention to. You know, there's like retreats that are all focused on like health and wellness, longevity, but also just like mental clarity and purpose and meaning. There's like, you know, bars being stood up in city centers that are like, you know, sauna and coffee and good coffee and like healthy food. And so I think that there's an increasing opportunity for event marketers to not just think about the move to offline as let's just do the same events we've always done, but it's how can we actually create experiences that are paying attention to not just the like business practices and community that we've led with, but also this like whole human kind of need that I think is perceived in culture today. So I think some really cool things we can do with that.
Yeah. Here's the rub. With offline marketing, one of the things that the executive team is going to ask for is how do we track it? Because we're
Yeah,
obsessed with tracking the results. So
totally.
what can we do there?
Well, there's like probably two answers that come to mind immediately. The first is I think you can track some of it, you know, especially if you're selling to the enterprise or a target account list where you're like, you know, hey, I worked with a company that sold to Fortune 500 LOs, chief legal officers. It's like there are only 500 people in the world that we care about with our
Mhm.
product. Like it's not, we're not trying to boil the ocean. Cool. How many of the 500 did we get to the event? And how many of them were prospects? How many of them were customers? You know, were there any interesting conversations that helped move that along? Did we create a new pipeline off of those relationships? Or was it sort of like a, you know, multi-touch type thing? And we've started sort of getting better networked in, opening up doors that otherwise weren't there. Let's like resist the temptation to like over attribute everything and just say, okay, we held an event. We had 50 of the 500 there. Let's celebrate that. And let's say, you know, we really built deeper relationships with our 10 customers and the other 40 are like brand new conversations we get to get. That's a positive ROI. The second thing I'd say is like, maybe I said it embedded in there. You can't measure everything. So let's give up on that and say, instead, let's go in and figure out rather than how is this all going to feed into my like Marketo report or HubSpot or whatever, like, you know, how are we going to build deeper relationships with the people that we get in front of, especially in person? And I think that, you know, I think for years that's been kind of a point of tension, especially when it comes to like CFOs and FP&A and getting budget to do more stuff. And I'm hopeful that we can just tell better stories as marketers on the value and impact of in-person human relationships versus just optimizing for what can be counted.
I don't know of another function that needs to market itself within an organization as to why it exists.
Yeah.
How does the nickel and diming and over tracking for marketers no other teams, get in the way of these experimental, fun,
Yeah,
in-person things we're going to try in the next few years?
it's hard because every sort of like executive team is going to have their own dynamics and their own kind of biases around what to do, especially if we're leaning on playbooks that we've done for a very long time. And so I think it depends. I spoke to one CMO just last week who said, "Hey, like I carve out like 10% of my budget for brand. It's like obnoxiously little, but we've come to terms as a leadership team that you're not going to ask me about anything with that 10%. It's like my discretionary like slush fund to do things." And so that's maybe one version of it. It's saying, hey, like let's get like really precise about CAC to LTV around like the demand budget and these types of things, but let's carve out, something that we're going to just be a bit more, think of it more as sort of an investment, that we're going to try things, to your point, experiment, that sort of thing. That's probably one way to do it. The other way is like, I don't know. I feel like it depends what you mean by brand. I think for that one CMO that said 10%, it was more around like, top of funnel, digital advertising, maybe some out of home, that sort of thing. I think there's a story to be told that like content marketing, events, community these are all brand things. And as I think we just unpacked in the last question, I think there's ways to measure it where you can tell a story to your CFO, to your CEO or to your CRO of how this budget is being deployed and the value that we're creating. But maybe I think you might have answered this question yourself. It's like we gotta go on our tour as marketers and tell people what we do and why we believe what we believe and kind of what our investment kind of strategy and thesis is and expected results and returns, and kind of get their buy-in along the way. And if you don't get that buy-in, then you're probably not going to do a lot of creative brand work that at that company if you don't have this kind of belief and support of your leadership team around you.
Well, I had a lot of fun with this conversation. You do have combos on your own show too. What is the name of that so everyone knows?
I do. So I forgot for a second. Yeah, the podcast is called the Brand Humanity Show. It used to be called the Golden Hour Podcast, but the Brand Humanity Show, obviously passionate about this topic. And yeah, I mean, I think anyone who is going to tell you that we have it all figured out on what's next is probably lying or full of themselves or whatever. And so about 4 months ago, I started this podcast and newsletter interviewing just folks either within marketing or adjacent to marketing, investors, recruiters, CMO recruiters, like really interesting people, to try to piece together what I think is the next generation of the marketing playbook. And so it's sort of an open learning type thing. Brand Humanity Show, and then Golden Hour Weekly is the newsletter as well, where we try to learn in public.
And we'll definitely link to all of that. We have a few questions before we close.
All right.
So what's one book, podcast, or show that you're loving right now?
You know what? This is going to be really random. I'm not a wrestling fan, but if you watch Unreal, I think is the name of the documentary on Netflix, especially for marketers, it's like the first time I think in history where you go behind the scenes of the WWE and they talk about like how they do what they do. And it turns out it's all storytelling and character development, and the way they're sort of like unpacking it. It's more academic than like anything I've read or watched or listened to with marketing. Like they're brilliant. They're expert marketers. And so it hasn't made me like turn into a fan necessarily to watch 3 times a week or whatever it is. But man, I just eat that show up because I feel like I learn something every time I watch it.
One of my little day jobs as a youngster was I was a boom operator in a documentary about an underground wrestling ring.
No way.
And I was like,
oh, that's awesome.
They were jumping off ladders. They made their own thing. I was like, this is not safe. But they would come in full character. So Unreal,
so
I will watch that. Okay.
It's worth it for sure.
And what's one thing you're learning or building this year?
Yeah, I mean, a lot. I think, not just what we talked about in terms of like, what does the marketing team look like in 2026 and beyond, our playbook, but I'm also personally going from like a W-2 salaried job to building kind of more of a service and media business that's a bit more 1099 driven and all of that. And so I'm sort of relearning how to like do business is a weird thing to say, but like how to operate a company. And, I think it's actually really fun and exciting, but also I have a lot to learn on how to think about it, how to like think about like the financial side of managing and scaling and subcontractors and hiring people and all of that,
Yeah.
taxes, all the fun stuff.
It's way different.
So different. Turns out very, very different.
Yeah. I know we talked about some gloomy things, but there was hope. So what's a little, if you had to leave folks with a little bit of glimmer of hope for the future of marketing,
Yeah.
what should we end on?
I think the whole thing's really, exciting. Especially if you're a creative minded marketer where you love storytelling and content and kind of the creative process and people and building experiences. Like, isn't that what marketing was
Mhm.
in its kind of purest form before, Google AdWords and, every outbound cold calling and everything else kind of changed it. And so I think for years we've been talking about like a renaissance in marketing. And I think that, you know, this is like finally happening. And so it's something to look forward to. And I would say if you are more on the kind of quant side of marketing, if you're more on the, I don't know, more of building that 5% kind of conversion funnel, I think it's a great time to like learn the technology, learn the tools, be tinkering, be building. And that skill set's going to be really helpful for your own career as we go to like, build the agentic systems that are going to be kind of powering a lot of that.
Appreciate you joining us and sharing your wisdom with
Of
us
course.
today.
Thank you.
Everybody
Thanks
can
for having
find
me.
you. We'll link you below so everyone can find you. Where do you hang out
Awesome.
most?
Sadly, LinkedIn is probably where I hang out the most. I'd rather hang out offline in analog mode, but LinkedIn
For now.
For now. Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, great to see you and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Chelsey. Appreciate it.